Hello and welcome to this episode of Career Shorts hosted by the Antibody Society, where we talk to a whole host of individuals from various sectors, including industry and academia, to gain their valuable insight into how PhD students and postdocs can navigate the tricky world after their studies and contracts end. In this episode, we're talking to Dr Nimish Gera, Head of Biologics at Mythic Therapeutics. And now this episode and all other episodes and more are all accessible via directly on the Antibody Society website or through our social media pages. And if you're watching on YouTube, then drop us a comment in the chat below or just pop us an email. We really value your suggestions and any comments you might have. Now, we hope you enjoy this and find this a valuable exchange, so let's get into it. So hi Nimish, welcome to Career Shorts. Before we jump in, would you be able to just give us a brief introduction into who you are and what you do?
Thank you, Rachel, and the organizers for inviting me to Career Shorts. I'm really excited to be here. My name is Nimish Gera. I'm the head of biologics at Mythic Therapeutics. It's a small startup company in the Boston area, and we work on antibody-drug conjugates. My background has been in antibody engineering and discovery, and I've done work on antibodies and bispecific antibodies throughout my career, all the way from grad school and then in industry for the last several years.
Awesome. And I wanted to ask you, what does it mean to be the head of biologics for people who don't know? But I kind of just wanted to take briefly just a step back because I saw on your LinkedIn that you co-founded Mythic Therapeutics. So kind of before going into briefly on your current role, what was the motive behind the leap into creating your own startup company, and what have been the challenges? Because there's a lot of interest now, the big movement into startups and taking bench work and translating it into patients, into the clinic.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I actually came into it almost by accident. I was at a company previously, Alexion, doing quite well, and programs were moving forward into development. I was just talking to a few fellow antibody engineers in the Boston area and trying to understand what's going on here and how the industry is doing. And someone told me about a certain position at a company that was not being taken, and maybe I should connect with the person there. And I reached out to the person on LinkedIn, who's now my current boss, but he told me about Mythic Therapeutics and how they were thinking of starting this company, he and his co-founder, and then we had several meetings. I visited them, signed a CDA with them, discussed the technology, which I really liked, and then ended up here at Mythic Therapeutics. I was the first person to be focused solely on science, and that's why I became the scientific co-founder of the company. And that's how I landed here. I've been here 3 years and 8 months now.
That's amazing. And it also just shows the power of LinkedIn.
Yeah.
I mean, what's been the most rewarding for you, moving from a company and into a startup and breeding up Mythic? How?
Yeah, I would say I was always someone that liked to build things from the ground up. It's funny that when I was an undergrad, the chemical engineering department that I joined in my university was the first time they were offering chemical engineering. So I was in the first batch of chemical engineers from the university. When I came to the US for my graduate studies, I was the first student of my PhD advisor. So I helped him set up the whole lab, and that was something that I really like. My first job was at a startup company to help them set up their discovery group. And then, I went to a bigger company. I saw more of how the drug development process works, and then came back to setting up, again, everything from scratch. So I think I really like building things, building them from the ground up, setting them up and setting up the process, and, just watching everything grow and mature and bear fruit, basically. So that's what attracts me.
Great. So you like pioneering and kind of leading the way rather than trudging behind.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, and I mean, how has your perspective changed of science changed? So you've gone from academia into industry. You've gone from a PhD to kind of doing cutting edge science. I mean, how? I mean, and presumably, are you just in the lab, or do you have a lot more administrative responsibilities? How has that changed your perspective of science, and especially in a startup? Because I presume your vision of the clinic and the industry and what patients need and what that means for your work.
Yeah, so there are a lot of questions in there. So I'll probably
Sorry.
start from no, that's good. I can probably start from my journey when I was in grad school, still doing my PhD, and how I ended up in the industry. So when I was in grad school, I was working on engineering proteins using yeast surface display. And proteins always fascinated me. While doing my PhD, I got this opportunity, and my PhD advisor really supported me to go do an internship in industry, which was very uncommon in our department, especially for PhD students to do that. It's very common for bachelor's and master's level people to go and do internships and do a co-op, but it was not very common in our department because you're pretty much gone for the whole summer, not working for your advisor. So uh, in some ways it was kind of looked down upon, but my advisor was very supportive. So I got a chance to do an internship at Genentech in South San Francisco. And when I was there, I really saw how a company works, how the work that I was doing in grad school is applied towards making drugs here now in industry. So I got to see the whole industry environment, how things run, what are the meetings like, how people make decisions, and I really liked that because that was tying my skill set directly to translating something for patients. I remember vividly that I was there once one of their drugs launched, and they had a launch party, and that was very, very exciting. Everyone's so excited, and you sort of start feeling, even though I didn't do anything for that drug, I was just there, right? So I really like that thrill of working towards something that eventually is going to help patients, and that's what may help me make my decision to go into industry. So when I was finishing up my PhD, I started applying for industry jobs and found a position at a small startup company. That's where my whole career started. Now, to your other question about being in a startup and how that changes things, but when we started Mythic, it was just an idea. So we had to go through a whole proof of concept process, which was in some ways you can call it very academic because you're still trying to prove a concept. And then once that got proven, then we started also making, in parallel, we started a lot of different things, but also making drugs or making molecules towards a specific project that we knew we want to take in the clinic if that pans out. Uh, and yeah, I mean, we grew at the same time. We hired a lot of people. Initially, we were more like an academic lab, but then slowly, we started getting more funding, and then we have more people. So it transitioned more into really a company developing drugs, and now we're at a stage where our molecules are now moving very fast, and we want to take them into clinic very soon. So we have some lead molecules that we want to take forward, and now I can start seeing, all these different facets of drug development, thinking about clinical trials, thinking about the regulatory aspects of the FDA, how to interface with them, and how do you really, even keep track of so many things that are going on. So a lot of project management. So I've gotten to see a lot of that now. So my role initially, I was in the lab, but I would say after the first 1.5 year of being at Mythic, I hired other people, so I was not in the lab as much. I'm not in the lab at all now. So, just doing administrative stuff, you can call it, but it's also, I mean, there's some administrative stuff, but it's mostly science-related strategy stuff, planning for the future, planning for new programs, new molecules, how we're going to execute on those programs and identify these drugs. So that's pretty much what I do right now on a daily basis.
Do you miss being in the lab? Was kind of being away from the lab something that you saw straight out of grad school, or kind of, yeah?
No, so I really love being in the lab in grad school, and I do enjoy it from time to time. I think I'm still very exposed to the data. So I'm looking at the data that's getting generating every day. I had to get used to the transition. It wasn't very hard for me because I really like people management and working with junior people. So I sort of think of this as instead of my two hands, now I have multiple hands working in the lab and helping me achieve what I wanted to do. So I have a big team that, you know, we can accomplish a lot more together. And I'm probably best served thinking more strategically and helping them advance their lab work. So for me, it wasn't hard getting out of the lab. I was pretty okay with it. I think it can be difficult for other people.
Yeah. Okay, but I guess, like you said, you still have that connection with the science and what you're doing, so you kind of get the best of both worlds. You don't have to spend a whole day doing an SDS page in a Western blot, but you can still see the value and the results of it afterwards.
Yes.
And
Yes.
what attributes do you think were more important for you to go down this route? Were there any skills in particular that you had to develop, or things that you noticed that you needed?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think one of the skills, and I mentioned this before, I really like people management. I think I had the benefit of working with a lot of undergraduate students when I was in grad school, and that really primed me for people management. Working with someone who doesn't really know and then explaining to them and teaching them and really getting them to a point where they can start doing the work that you were doing is something that really is very rewarding to me. So I really enjoyed that. I think I was fortunate that I had that opportunity when I was in grad school. Things that I had to learn, I think maybe being a little bit more strategic about finishing up things so that they can lead to decisions. So, you know, I've started thinking more around data that I generate should always enable a decision, whether yes or no. It shouldn't be data that's like, I don't know what the next step is. So planning and thinking about the experiment so that we can keep moving ahead always is something that I think I've grown to appreciate a lot more. I think I do better at it now. Um, Other skills would be communication and working with other people as a team, right? I mean, I think I personally found myself to be a person that works well in the team, but it really comes to bear a lot when you're in industry and there are multiple people working on the same program, as opposed to your PhD where you're the owner of your project. So I think the teamwork and working towards a common goal is something that I've started to appreciate a lot more when I moved to industry. And yeah, I mean, other things, I think I've become more patient-centric. You know, I think at least in some of the jobs that I have in the past, having the line of sight to what I'm doing and how that's going to impact the patient. Say if I'm working on a molecule that's going to improve the dosing convenience for a patient, meaning that they would only have to take this drug now once every 4 weeks instead of once every 2 weeks. So knowing that information and then sort of working backwards towards it, that what does this mean in terms of my experiment today, has been very helpful. So I think those were the main learnings that I've had in my transition from academia to industry.
Yeah. I think that's really valuable, and I think it also highlights so sometimes you don't have to get extracurricular, in the sense extracurricular experience, to have something that's translatable to industry. So for example, you mentioned the mentoring students and undergrad students and helping them through the lab. Like, I think that's something that many students and postdocs can relate to. And I think sometimes they don't sell that as well when they have an interview and they're trying to think of the skills that they've generated.
Great.
Yeah, and I guess that kind of, you've answered it essentially, but what skills do you think that, for both lab-wise and kind of management-wise, what skills do you see that the next incoming batch of antibody scientists in general that they need? And what do you think are the best ways for them to develop these skills? So I know you've mentioned, interpersonal skills in particular are very important.
Yeah. So I guess those skills, of course, are very, very important. Other things I would say is if you get a chance to work on a collaborative project with industry, I think that'll give you a lot of exposure. I mentioned the internship, which really helped me a lot. I think getting involved with that as much as you can would help a lot. Some sort of project management experience, and that I would say that doesn't necessarily have to be academic. I would think just bringing things together and really making a project work. I mean, it could be as simple as working on an event that you were organizing, right? And just working on something where you have a number of different stakeholders, and then you have to get work done by multiple people to achieve a final goal. I think that's would also be, I would say, a skill that could help students quite a lot. I don't know if you were also asking about scientific skills, or are you just talking about additional skills?
No, scientific skills as well. I mean, for example, you at Mythic, when you're trying to recruit someone, are you looking for the know-how that they know X, Y, and Z, or are you looking more for the kind of proactive ability to learn and adapt and change?
Yeah, I would say both. I think curiosity and the ability to learn and grow is really, really important because, especially at a small company, things will change a lot. My job is very different today than what it was 3 years ago. And things keep changing all the time, and you have to learn to adapt with the change. We do look for scientific skill sets. I mean, I'm an antibody engineer, so I'm of course looking for people that have worked with antibodies before or engineered proteins before and worked with display techniques and looking at characterization of antibodies, whether it's biophysical like thermal stability and affinity, or even looking at other properties of antibodies, high solubility and developability, things like that. So maybe being aware of the literature more around translation in antibodies would be helpful. Certainly, any company that you're potentially interviewing with, learn about what they do and the work that they have done and they've published. You'd be surprised how many people don't do any homework on that. I think that's could be very powerful, right? I mean, because that could generate a lot of questions and shows that you were interested in the work that the company does and you actually spent the time to look it up. I mean, I'm telling you just general things. I mean, scientific toolbox and scientific skills, I think a lot of people are very good at. But really developing some of these soft skills and being curious, being ready to learn and just trying to know more and show that you are interested would help a lot. Because some people, they are interested, but it doesn't come across because they are interested.
Yeah. Oh no, I think that's really useful, and I like how you mentioned in your answer about how 3 years ago things completely changed. I mean, how would you compare in terms of the field of antibodies and antibody development? How does it compare 5 years ago to today? Like, has there been anything that's been quite unexpected in the field, and what are your expectations for the future? However,
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I think a number of things have changed. There's a lot more focus on being more high throughput and doing a lot of things in parallel at the same time. I think for me personally, something that has changed quite a bit is I was not a big fan of computational modeling in antibody engineering based on that up until I would say even a couple of years ago. but some of the most recent advances is, and certainly last year, the AlphaFold result from Google has really changed my perspective on that. And I think there's going to be a lot of powerful contributions from the computational modeling field, if not to the discovery, but at least to the engineering of a molecule. Because I've always felt, and this is my personal bias, discovery and doing de novo discovery, you need to start from scratch. And a lot of these computational models, they need a starting point. They need a best guess. So I personally feel that they would do a lot better in engineering an existing molecule rather than coming up with a brand new antibody. So I think that could be really powerful. And then coupled with AI and machine learning, I'm excited to see what happens. I mean, that's an area I don't have any experience in, but certainly something that I want to learn more about and understand how that impacts science and drug development.
I guess because we're running out of time and I'm aware that you're very busy, I'll kind of wrap up with one final question, if that's okay.
Sure.
And that's, like, is there a moment that's kind of defined where you are today? Like, how has your overall life experience kind of influenced the career decisions that you've made to where you've got today?
Yeah, that's, I think I probably have to go back to my undergrad days for that. So I went to do an engineering school, but I was also always quite interested in biology. And, I did my undergrad back in India. And when you go to an engineering school, you're sort of trying to decide on which major you want to join, right? And I was always intrigued by biotech. But the feedback I heard from a lot of people is, it's really up and coming, but there aren't as many jobs around here. So I actually instead went into chemical engineering. So while I was in my chemical engineering course, in my second semester, in the first year, they have a lot of courses that are common to every major. You don't have to do your major specific classes in the first year. So my second semester, there was a course in modern biology that I took that I really enjoyed because I was getting to do what I wanted to do, still being in chemical engineering. Yeah. So what I ended up doing, I think, throughout the rest of my undergrad was I took a class each semester outside of chemical engineering in the biotech department. And I started building my learning around biotech and how people do things, and that include lab classes. I did, molecular biology, cell biology, all those classes, and also, attended the lectures, but also the labs. And I think that really helped me to learn a lot more, even in an area that I didn't choose to begin with, but I was very interested in, and set me well for my career in the future. So that when I joined here for my PhD program, I joined a chemical and biomolecular engineering department and was able to totally transition into biotech, even being a chemical engineering major. I think it's very common in the US, but it's not so common back in India. So I think for me personally, that was a defining moment.
And that's all for this interview. Thank you very much for listening, and more importantly, we hope you found today's session insightful and valuable. Now, if you'd like to listen to more interviews like this and more, then please check out the Antibody Society's website. Membership is free for all students and postdocs, and we have some really great value for money memberships for our academic and industry partners. Please feel free to share this video and come check us out on our LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube page. And if you'd like to connect with today's speaker or reach out to us, then please check out some of the details in the description box below. And thanks again for listening.